Hello, my name is Martin de Saul from the University of Brighton, and I'm very pleased today to be talking to my colleague, Dr. David Horner, about his research on the areas of forecasting and more specifically the ethics of forecasting. So David, I know you're currently working on a book on this area. Perhaps you can just explain a little bit about what the relationship between ethics and forecasting is and why you're writing this book.
Well, what I'm particularly interested in is futurology and technological forecasting, although I think some of the lessons that we can draw from futurology and technological forecasting apply to other forms of forecasting, but let's just stick with the technological forecasting. And what's puzzling about technological forecasting and futurology is that the record of accurate forecasting of technological developments is so dismally poor, and yet it continues to be something that people put their faith in. And there's a kind of story that goes with it, that in order to both develop the beneficial aspects of technology and forestall the negative aspects of technology, we have to anticipate what their social, economic, cultural, political, etc. impacts might be. So there's an ethical aspect to that, in the sense that the idea is, by looking into the future and looking at different scenarios in the way that technologies develop, we can anticipate the negative ones and regulate the development of the technology or control the technology in some way to mitigate any negative effects. So that's one ethical aspect, it seems to me, of forecasting. The other ethical aspect, so, seems to me that, of course, if these forecasts are usually wrong, and for conceptual reasons I argue that they're almost bound to be wrong, that in fact we can't forecast the future, then there's an ethical aspect, in the sense that what is it that people are doing when they're making these forecasts? And part of my argument is they're making kinds of promises, but it's an odd thing to make promises that in a sense can be demonstrably shown to be false promises almost at the moment that they're made. So there's a kind of act of bad faith, even if it's unintentional, when people make long-term, particularly medium and long-term forecasts about the future impacts of technology.
Okay,
so,
well, let me just pick up on that, because you and I have talked about this before, and if you work in government, if you work in a big corporation, you have to set objectives, set out policy.
Sure.
And, reasonably, it seems reasonable that if you're going to set those objectives and policies, that you need some idea as to what you think the future holds. Therefore, there is a need for people to try and predict, obviously not always accurately, but the future in some way or other. So,
But I think you're talking about two separate things there, that and I think you can make a clear distinction between having goals or hopes or expectations and saying certain things are valuable and therefore we must try and design our technologies to fulfill certain goals. That, it seems to me, that's very different from claiming that you have knowledge about what actually the course of events is going to be in the future. And it seems to me one of the very puzzling aspects of forecasting is it's saying, well, we can have information about things that don't yet exist. And that seems to me to be one of the conceptual difficulties which lead to some of the ethical problems. So, yeah, sure, we have to have frameworks in which we think about the future. What's the right policies, what are we going to aim for, what sort of value should inform those policies, what evidence have we got about what's happened in the past. But none of that is the same as knowing stuff about the future.
okay.
And I think there's also a distinction to be made between the kind of forecasting that goes on in futurology and technological forecasting, and you mentioned the word prediction, and the way we understand prediction in science. And of course, prediction in science serves an altogether different function. I mean, that's prediction in science is about testing hypotheses. So prediction in science is about, well, we don't know, so we're going to, on the basis of our theories, we're going to make some predictions about what the states of affairs are going to be in the future, and then we set up some experiments, we test them, and so on. Standard scientific procedure. Now, when you're making social forecasts, and technological forecasts are really social forecasts because they're about states of affairs in the future that involve society, it just ain't like that, is it? You can't then go back and say, oh, well, we seem to have made a mistake now there, so we'll kind of wind back the experiment and start again. The problem with, particularly when you're talking about large-scale technologies, is the irreversibility of the kinds of decisions that one might make. Well, if you want to gamble, that's fine, but don't tell me that you know that's going to happen.
Okay, that's a fair point, and you make the claim in stuff that you've written and presentations that you've made that a lot of forecasting is just totally wrong or very inaccurate.
Yep.
If that's the case, and I guess you'd argue the evidence shows it is the case, why do organisations, corporations spend so much money on paying people to come up with these forecasts?
What you're asking me there is a sort of a question about psychology and motivation, not about the veracity of forecasting as a process, which is what I'm interested in. So there might be a host of commercial, economic, political reasons why forecasting is paid for or goes on, or ideological reasons indeed. So that doesn't seem to me. That's not the question that I'm really interested in, the psychological aspect. But I mean, very broadly, of course. Very broadly, we're always looking for security. We're looking for security. And one of the ways we try and shore up our sense of uncertainty is by reducing that uncertainty by trying to make predictions about the future. So I think there's a sort of broad set of fairly natural impulses to make predictions in the way I've been talking about them, which are to do with security. But there are also ideological reasons why people want to predict, because they want to promote a certain technology. So they'll say, this technology is going to have fantastic effects in the future, so let's get behind it. And what's more, it's reasonable to get behind it because here we've got the evidence from our extrapolations and our scenario techniques and our Delphi or whatever particular methodology they might be using to make their forecasts, and say, well, this is the technology of the future.
Okay, so let's bring it back a little bit, if we can, to information professionals, librarians, people very often, who have to manage this information, whether it's futurology or whatever. Do you see obligations, or how do you view the work that information professionals, librarians do in managing information, disseminating information? Do you think there's a case to be made for perhaps more awareness about the validity of forecasting as a source of information, or as a type of information rather?
I think so. I mean, it depends on how we see the information professional's role in relation to quality of information. And of course, my contention would be that much of the material that's put out, in consultants' reports or think tank reports, or in reports in the popular press, is pretty specious. So, to some extent, I think if within in a particular position that the professional information worker has that kind of responsibility to advise their clients about the quality of information, then it seems to me there's surely an ethical imperative to do so.
Okay, well, thanks very much, David, and I look forward to reading the book when it comes out.
Well, thank you very much.
For more information about our postgraduate library and information courses at the University of Brighton, visit our blog informationmatters.net.